civil rights movement arguably started during and after World War II. For the first time, white soldiers began to look at blacks as fellow Americans. A great example of this is the Tuskegee Airmen, who were liked and respected by the bomber pilots that they escorted. However, after the war, everything was the same old place, and after a series of lynchings of black war vets, President Truman decided to take action. In 1948, Truman desegregated the military. This was huge. This event forced white segregationists, specifically in the South, to begin rethinking Jim Crow and these racist laws. The spark that would ignite the powder keg, however, would come in 1955 when a woman named Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat to a white passenger on a bus. Parks was arrested, of course, and what followed were massive boycotts of the Montgomery bus system. The court case that followed ultimately went to the Supreme Court. This is where the buses were finally desegregated. Not long after the events with Rosa Parks, a historic Supreme Court case took place. It was known as Brown v. Board of Education. This case was about the desegregation of schools, and there was a tremendous amount of publicity surrounding it. Ultimately, Brown v. Board was a landmark case which saw the use of extensive protesting and demonstrations to usher such a thing into the Supreme Court. Schools were now no longer needing to separate white and black students. This was a big step in peaceful power grabbing, and while the road was still far from over, it was a huge step. After the Brown v. Board Supreme Court case, people and officials were still very reluctant to integrate the schools, and this was put to the test with the Little Rock Nine. The Nine were a group of students that would be the first African-American students to test the Brown v. Board decision. This was certainly not warmly welcomed, and things got very hectic when on the first day of school they had to be escorted into the school with the protection of army and police. On one day alone, there were over 1,000 people protesting them going to their school. However, this was not an end to their problems. The principal didn't like that they were there, and so he called in the National Guard, and for a while they blocked their entrance to the school. However, President Eisenhower convinced the principal to remove the National Guard, and things never really settled down for them, though. They were able to complete their schooling and at an all-white high school, which was astonishing. Up until that point, such a thing had never been done before. This was yet again another large step in the civil rights movement. Now that the groundwork had been laid in some important areas, the civil rights movement began to be seen even in the Deep South. One of these instances was the Albany movement. The movement began with a student-formed committee called the SNCC. They were going to try and end all forms of discrimination in the city and were starting with voting discrimination. However, they also protested other issues. The SNCC teamed up with the NAACP to have more powerful protests. The movement began to fail, though, in November when over 500 people were jailed on a single day. These groups brought the attention of MLK, who upon arriving tried to rally the demonstrators. However, MLK was soon arrested, and with all their leaders in prison, the movement began to fall apart. They made a deal with the city, though, where if MLK and the other leaders were released, they would obey the city's laws. However, this deal was not upheld, and MLK remained jailed until he was bailed out. However, not all of these movements were unsuccessful. In fact, far from it. Martin Luther King, a beacon of hope and inspiration for the civil rights movement, led a march on Washington which now lives in infamy. On August 28, 1963, over 250,000 black and whites joined together to protest inequality and segregation. Up until that point in time, there had never been a movement of this magnitude, and it's arguable that it was here when black and white people started to come together, not on the color of their skin, but on the content of their character. The mass demonstrators ultimately stopped at the Lincoln Memorial, where Martin Luther King delivered his famous "I Have a Dream" speech. It was a huge success and was later even endorsed by President Kennedy. All in all, the civil rights movement was a hard-fought process, but despite this, it ended up being a success and helped us get much closer to a colorblind society.